So Civic Tech is very happy to welcome the very amazing, they are, I've read them, they're very interesting and important, insightful insights from Dr. Martin Osborne tonight. Dr. Osborne is a professor of economics with expertise in game theory. He's not only lived in Bloor West neighborhood for the past 30 years, home of Jane Jacobs, if I'm not mistaken. I've lived in that neighborhood too. He's also conducted the annual survey of street-level businesses on Bloor Street between Spadina and Christie. Tonight, we're excited to have him share his deep and useful real-world insights. Take it away, Dr. Osborne.
Okay, am I audible?
Should be good, yeah.
It doesn't matter where I stand?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to tell you about this project, which started just for my own amusement. In 1984, I moved to the Bloor Bathurst neighborhood and I've lived there ever since, so actually 40 years, not 30 years. In 1993, I went away on a 9-month sabbatical, came back in 1994, and had the impression that many of the businesses on Bloor Street had changed. But I couldn't exactly remember what had been there before, and I felt that I needed to keep better track of what was happening. So either that or not take any more sabbaticals. So the first option sounded better. So in 1995, in the late summer of 1995, I conducted a census of all street level businesses on Bloor Street between Spadina and Christie. And I've repeated that exercise every year for the last 30 years in the late summer. In 2023, I decided to extend it west to Lansdowne. So for 2 years, I have data from Spadina all the way to Lansdowne. So, okay, how do I do this? Okay, so that's the neighborhood around Bloor Street between University and Lansdowne. Oh, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong thing. That's the area I've surveyed for 30 years, so I've done a census for 30 years, and that's the longer stretch that I've covered the last 2 years. So most of the time I'm going to be talking about Spadina to Christie because I just have 2 years of data on the longer stretch. So here's the neighborhood I'm talking about. How many people, just as a matter of interest, how many people are sort of moderately familiar with this neighborhood? Okay, good, all right. So if I mention some specific things, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, so first I'm going to tell you about the structure of the data, and then I'm going to tell you about some characteristics, how things have changed over time. Civic text suggests text, so I thought I should tell you a little bit about how the database is set up. So if we want to talk about what to do with it, we have a better understanding of that. So it's the data is stored in a relational database with several tables. One table has locations, so it's a table of locations. Identified by the number that the city gives that particular spot. Of course, locations change over time. Sometimes actually the city has moved numbers from one spot to another spot. So it's not exactly just the number that identifies the location. But anyway, there's a table of locations. There's a table of businesses identified by the name I observed when I first saw that business. And then there are some tables that describe the nature of the business. So I put every business in a single category. So categories, for example, are prepared food. So that prepared food is one example, including restaurants, cafes, donut shops, bakeries. Clothing is another category. So every business has one category. But within each category, there are several types. And a business can have several types. So, for example, Shoppers Drug Mart is in the medical category, is where I put it. Its type is drugstore. So it's a drugstore within the medical category, but of course it also sells food now. So it also has another type, which is food. So two examples of types here are a restaurant is a type within the prepared food category, and women's clothing is a type within the clothing category. And then some of these types have subtypes. So for example, I classify restaurants by their cuisine, Japanese, Korean, whatever. Now, if you know this neighborhood, and you can see like most of you do, you know that west of Bathurst, there are lots of businesses catering to Korean speakers of Korean. So when I started off, I was interested, thinking of the future, in you know, are there going to be more of these or fewer of these? So I wanted to associate with each business an indicator of ethnicity. Well, not with every business, but I wanted to those businesses who catered specifically to speakers of Korean or speakers of Spanish. Those were the two languages other than English that were present in that strip. I wanted to assign those that ethnicity. So I'm not sure that ethnicity is really the right word, the right name. But if I saw a business and a lot of its signage was in Korean, then I said, okay, that's a Korean store. That has the Korean ethnicity. Or if there's a lot of signage in Spanish, it's Hispanic. Now there's this that's a sort of a subjective judgment, but I'll show you some data in a few minutes. So I think some interesting things have happened with the makeup, the ethnic makeup. Okay, so those are basically the tables. And then what is an observation? An observation is a survey ID, a location, a business, a category, an ethnicity, and the observed name. So the names of businesses change over time. And in recent years, in the last couple of years, I've tried to find a URL for every business. And then we have a business can have an observation can have several types. So there's an observation type table, which has observation IDs and type IDs and subtype IDs. Now let me comment on a couple of points. One is that here in this database, every location is one item. So Honest Edge, when it existed, was one location, one business. What's it called? Coffee Pocket is also one business. Now, obviously, those businesses are vastly different sizes. So when Honest Edge was demolished, it created one vacancy. In my data, if Coffee Pocket goes out of business or whatever vacates their spot, that'll also be one vacancy. So that isn't totally satisfactory, and it would actually be good to have some measure of the size of the business. I don't know exactly how to do that in a nice way. The second comment is that I observe the name of a business, and I observe the goods it sells. Generally, sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell what's being sold, but I don't observe the ownership of the business. So Dominion was founded in 1919. It changed ownership sometime in the 20s or 30s or 40s, I think. And then it changed ownership again in the 1980s, I believe, but it kept the same name. And so in my database, it's one business until 2008 when it changed to Metro, and then I recorded as a new business. So when I talk about different businesses, when we see data about different businesses, I'm not talking about different ownership. So I'm talking just about different names and the types of goods that are being sold. What next? Sorry. Okay, so now it turns out that I'm not the first person to do such a survey. I don't know how well known it is, but from 1860 to 1980, in almost every year, there was a company that surveyed not Bloor Street between Spadina and Christie, but they surveyed every single street in Toronto, including residential streets. They sent canvassers around who knocked on doors and asked, okay, what's your name? Are you the head of the household, or who is the head of the household? Where do they work? What is their job? What is your phone number? And they recorded that information. I mean, amazingly, most people gave it to them, almost everybody, it seems. They recorded that information, and then they compiled it into a directory. They sorted it by last name of these people. So there's a directory, a listing of people, and they sorted it also by street. And they also, up to 1967, they classified the type of each business, so that I should have made it clear that they did this not just for residences, for houses, but also for all businesses. So they classified each business in much the same way that I classify them into a category, and they published a listing of a classified listing of businesses, which is printed on yellow paper. So the yellow pages of the directory were like the yellow pages of the telephone directory that or maybe you guys are too young to remember, but that we used to use all the time. So here's the cover page of the 1904 directory, and here's a sample of just a random page of the listing by people. It says that Annie Osborne was a dressmaker who lived on Church Street, and down here we have John Osborne, who lived on Baldwin, was a laborer, and Joseph Osborne, who was an inmate. I don't know how they got that information exactly, but I mean, I guess, yeah. 130 Dunn Avenue. Yeah, I checked now, and now it's a rehabilitation center, so perhaps then it was a prison. I don't know. For my purposes, the most useful listing is the listing by street. Here's the listing in the right-hand column here of Spadina. This is in 1904, Bloor between Spadina and Manning. There were no businesses. This is just the north side. There were no businesses up to Albany at all, and then there were a few businesses later on. Here's a more modern listing. This is the 1969. This is the block of the south side between Bathurst and Markham, where Honest Ed's at that point was just occupying half the block. Some other stores were occupying the eastern part. Okay, so in the last couple of months, actually spurred partly by this, I've been thinking of doing this for a while, but spurred partly by this invitation, I've used the information in these directories to extend the database back. Actually, so far I got back to 1954. So now we have 70 years of data of businesses on Bloor Street. These 40 years of these directories, and then 30 years of my surveys. The directories, I said they were published almost every year until 1980, and then after that, from 1980 to 2001, they were published more or less every other year. But the data quality definitely decreased. They were losing enthusiasm in this project, I think. Okay, so now let's see what the data says. So this is the distribution of businesses by category in 2024 for Spadina to Christie. So almost half the businesses are restaurants, cafes, donut shops, whatever, selling prepared food, bakeries. About 9% personal care. So these are barbers, hairdressers, beauty salons, nail salons. 6% medical. So this does include drugstores. I don't know whether drugstores should really be medical, but drugstores and dentists and physicians. I don't think there are any physicians currently on with street level businesses, but there used to be quite a few. There's food, 5% food, 5% drugs. This is, you know, cannabis, tobacco, vaping. Now arts, this is, I have a category called arts, books and music. So this is bookstores, record stores when they existed, video stores, that kind of thing. And then about 4% clothes, and then there are these other categories here, and then a bunch of categories less than 1%. Now, so firstly, let me just briefly compare that with Christie to Lansdowne. So this is not a temporal comparison, but a comparison between these two areas. So you see there's quite a big difference. There's about a third of the businesses are restaurants and cafes and so forth, rather than a half. But the rest of the distribution is actually pretty similar. 8% personal care, 9%, medical 7%, medical 6%, food 6%, food 5%, drugs 5% in both cases, and so forth. Christie Lansdowne has more convenience stores, more religious businesses, and there's another category here. Yeah, personal adornment. It has a lot of tattoo parlors and jewelry stores, or at least has a significant number, whereas there aren't any on, or there are fewer on Spadina and Christie. Okay, so now let's look back in time. So there's 2024 Spadina and Christie again. In 1995, so that was my first survey 30 years ago, 29 years ago, I guess. The fraction of restaurants was also about a third, like it is on Christie to Lansdowne, like it is from Christie to Lansdowne now. But the rest of the distribution was quite different. There were twice as many food stores, twice as many, more than twice as many, 2.5 times as many clothing stores, a lot more bookstores and you know, art stores, 8% versus 4%. Medical was a little bit less, and then we have this category of travel. There's only, I think there's one street level travel agent left on the Spadina Christie sector now. There are quite a few that have second floor businesses, but in 1995 there were a lot of street level businesses that were travel. Now, if we go back another 30 years to 1964, prepared food, these restaurant cafes and so forth, gone down to 12%. So 12 versus 49, this is you know, 1/4. Lots of doctors had street level businesses. I don't know why they needed to have street level offices. It's not like, yeah, you need walk by customers if you're a doctor, but do you? I don't know. Clothing stores, also lots of clothing stores, 18% versus just 4% now. Personal care was about the same as it is now. It was less in the, so these are barbers, hairdressers, beauty salons, and so forth. In 1995, it decreased. One category here that was surprising to me, I don't know whether it's surprising to you, was automobile-related businesses. So in 1964, how many gas stations were there in this sector, Spadina Christie? Anybody know?
Not zero.
Not zero. Now,
More.
more? More than there are now. Yeah, right. That's correct. I think there were 5. There were either 4 or 5. In 1954, I'm pretty sure there were 5. It might be by 1964 there were only 4. Yeah, and there were two automobile, you know, car showrooms, two businesses selling cars, selling new cars, and I think in addition there was a used car. There's a used car place also, and an auto supply store. So the makeup of the street in 1964, it looked very different from what it does today. Now let's look at a few types to see a little bit more detail. Oh, so before that, let me give the whole picture. So this is the picture from 1954 to 2024, broken down by category. So this is the prepared food, starting at 12% and now winding up at 49%. Food stores have diminished a bit. Personal care went down in the middle here and then increased. The reason I put this in, I meant to say, the reason I put this in a red box, the data quality for these years is not so great. The directories weren't published every year. That's why there are these gaps here. And the classified listing by type of business was not published at all. So these gray spots up here are businesses for which I don't know what they were selling. I know the name, but one of the names is the Bloor Shop. So what did the Bloor Shop sell? I have no idea. There are quite a few of those in these middle years. It's just impossible. Seems impossible. I tried to Google online, but most of these stores haven't left any remnants online. Well, of course, they didn't have an online presence when they existed, and there's no record of them that I can find. Medical category, as I said, was very large pretty large in the 50s and 60s, and has diminished almost to zero. This is the personal endowment. There were lots of jewelry stores in these years. Realtors, for some reason, in the 60s, the 70s, the early 70s, lots of realtors on the street. I don't know exactly why. Automobiles are up there. So that's the progression for automobiles. There were 12 automobile-related businesses in 1960. By 1982, 1983, they disappeared completely. Physicians and dentists, so the yellow is physicians. 18 physicians had street-level offices in 1959. Now we're starting in 1959. And the last one was in 1985. Dentists, there were dentists in the 50s and 60s, and they seem to move out. There's been a resurgence of dental business in recent years. Shoes, you can't buy shoes at least there's no store devoted to shoes on Bloor Street anymore, but there used to be 11, 12 in those years. You also can't get shoes repaired, but there were lots of shoe repairers, at least five shoe repairers in the 50s, 60s. Tailors have also disappeared. Furriers, nobody wears fur coats anymore, I guess. Butchers, there were 10 butchers in this sector. Seems a lot. Jewelry stores have peaked in the mid-1980s and have dropped off a lot now. This is these are travel businesses. So I guess this was the sort of the beginning of the era of mass travel. Lots of travel agents set up businesses on the street, and then that business moved online, and so now there's just one remaining in Koreatown. I'm probably way over my 15 minutes, right? Am I?
We have about 10. Is that right?
But that includes questions, or?
Questions, yeah.
Okay, all right. I don't have much more to say, but okay, I'll try and be quick. Bookstores, there were a relatively large number of bookstores at 12 in the late 1980s. They've diminished quite a bit. Oh, whoops, sorry. How do I go back? This is personal care, barbers, hairdressers. While everybody was traveling and reading books in this era, they weren't getting their hair cut, apparently. Prepared food. So let's look a little more detail at prepared food. So cafes, almost non-existent in the 60s. I'm not even sure that this one business that I put in that category really was a cafe. It was called a coffee shop, but is a coffee shop a cafe? I'm not sure. Maybe it is. Restaurants have, there were 17 in 1959. There are now 78. And as you know, the area from the area from Bathurst to Christie has a lot of Korean restaurants. In fact, the total number of Korean restaurants reached 30 in 2007. Has now gone back to 26. Now, the first Korean restaurant that I found was in 1972. It lasted just 1 year. But in the following year, 1972, there were 2 Korean restaurants that started, one of which survives today, Korea House. Looks like its second floor could do with some work, but it is still in business. Japanese restaurants have also increased a lot. Now, presumably the Korean restaurants have increased, or let's go back to the Korean restaurants a minute. So the Korean restaurants increased a lot here, presumably because a lot of people of Korean heritage were moving into the area. But I suppose the same factor is not driving Japanese restaurants. It's not like we have a lot of Japanese people living. Rather, people developed a taste for Japanese food, I suppose. Now, this is my ethnicity variable. So what's happened to the number of businesses with signage in Korean and Spanish? So this is just since 1995, because I can't, for the directories, I can't assign that indicator, because I don't know. I don't observe the business. All I see is the name. But here I actually observed the business. I look at the sign, I looked at the menu and see whether it has a lot of Korean or Spanish. So in 1995, there were 45, they increased to 74, and then there's been a steady decline. Well, not exactly steady, I guess, but there has been a decline. Now it's sort of flattened out. As I said, this is not a very, a definite variable. It's very subjective to judge whether how much Korean language is enough to classify the business as Korean. So you probably shouldn't take these very seriously, but I think it probably is the case that it's sort of become less, has become less Korean. Perhaps because second generation Koreans, prefer to read English even if they speak Korean. I don't know whether that's the reason. There were a significant number of stores catering to Spanish speakers in the 90s through the early 2000s, but now there's only one left. Now, the data allows me to talk about the survival of businesses. So this shows the survival of restaurants. So what do we have here? So in 1995, I observed 48 restaurants on the strip. Of those, about 39 survived to 1996. Whatever, 34 survived to 1997. And then we get here, there are just 4 left in 2024. So of the 48 restaurants that I observed in 1995, 4 remain in business. I think this is 4, maybe 3 or 4. And similarly, of the, what is this, 9 or 10 new restaurants that I observed in 1996, about 4 or 5 survived till the next year, and then there was just 1 left in 2016, and then that went out of business. So those were data on the survival of businesses. But now you might be interested also in the longevity of businesses. Now my data are not, we can't just look at the data and calculate the longevity. We have to do an estimation exercise, because I have observations only for 30 years. And so if we just look at the number of businesses that I have observed that have lasted 10 years or 12 years or 15 years, those numbers are going to be biased against long-lived businesses. For example, there's no business that lasts more than 30 years that I could possibly observe because I've only have 30 years of data. So I apply an adjustment to the actual counts to get this estimated longevity. But it's not the only adjustment you could make. I'm not sure it's the best one, but if you make that adjustment, then you get this distribution. So the 23% of businesses last 1 year, 16% last 2 years. So the mode is 1 year, median is 3 years, and the mean is 5 years. If we restrict to restaurants, then the picture is more or less the same, or somewhat similar. 28% in this case lasts only 1 year. Okay, so why have these changes taken place? I mean, I've mentioned a few things. Are we better off or worse off? Well, those are things we can discuss. Let me just finish by showing you a theory of Jane Jacobs, who lived on Albany Street, just east of Bathurst, had this theory. So she says an interesting street, and she was thinking of these blocks, this area, attracts outsiders. So people who don't live in the area come in and they patronize these businesses. That drives rents up, and then only the most profitable stores remain. The hardware store goes, the bookstore closes. She was thinking of Book City. The place that repairs small appliances moves away. The butcher shops and bakeries disappear. And diversity decreases, and monoculture remains. Incredible repetitions of whatever happens to be the most profitable on that street at that time. I'm not sure in 2004, but she may have been thinking of Japanese restaurants. I'm not sure. So then she says some of these similar businesses will fail. You'll have a lot of vacancies. And so a popular main pedestrian street running through my own neighborhood is now afflicted by this dynamic. And she argues that the remaining businesses, the ones that are left, are the ones that own the buildings in which they operate. They're not affected by the rent increases. Well, they are affected in the sense that, of course, the value of their building goes up, so that if they sell, they get a lot more money. So I'm not sure I really buy this theory, but I thought I would tell you about it perhaps as a basis for discussion, or at least a starting point for discussion. There's the website. Sorry, I think I probably used far more time than I should have. But
That's amazing.